So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at this National Consortium for Societal Resilience webinar on assessing the public value of societal resilience to disruption. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch back later. So once I've finished this brief introduction, I will add the link to where the webinar recordings will be so that you can obviously check back and share with your networks later on whenever the recording is available. So my name is Andrew McClelland and I'm a research fellow at the Alliance Manchester Business School at the University of Manchester. So as well as doing this brief welcome, I'll also be moderating the Q&As later. So you will have noticed that your microphones and your cameras are currently switched off. You can contribute, however, questions and comments via the chat and the Q&A functions. And whenever we come to the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, I will be asking folk to raise their hands so that you can come on camera and off mute to verbalize your questions. Please feel free to pop in the chat who you are and where you're from, just that we can get a sense of everyone that's joining us today. So our agenda is straightforward. After this introduction, really delighted to welcome the two speakers. Carolyn Otley, who is the Chief Executive of Cumbria CVS, and Duncan Shaw, who many of you will know from the University of Manchester and also co-chair of the NCSR Plus. So both of them are part of the authoring team of the research that will be the core focus of today's webinar. So it's really fantastic that they're able to share with us and that you will then have the opportunity to ask some questions. Before I pass over to Carolyn to kick us off, just a reminder in terms of upcoming webinars. So just at the end of this month, on the 25th of March, we have a webinar with several speakers focusing on a lifetime of resilience, flood engagement through every life stage. I will add the link to this, the registration link for this webinar in the chat once I've finished this introduction. We haven't yet created the registration page for the webinar that we're having on the 14th of April, but I expect that will be imminent. So that webinar will focus on building societal resilience with a particular focus on the citizen aid story. So we will obviously share the April webinar details with you once the registration page has been created. So thank you everyone who are already contributing via the chat function, in terms of who you are and where you're from. And I hope we'll have a really fantastic webinar over the next hour or so. So Caroline, I wonder if I can ask you to come off mute, and Duncan will be able to start then sharing the slides for your presentation. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. So whilst Duncan starts sharing his slides, and with there, I will do a bit of an introduction to how this project started. And I guess it's a quite simple story, really. There's been lots of community-led resilience work going on in Cumbria over the last 20 years, and I've been involved in that for a bit over 10 years. I spent 5 years as the Community Resilience Coordinator for Cumbria's Local Resilience Forum before taking on the Chief Exec role at Cumbria CVS, which is a local voluntary sector infrastructure organisation, just over a year ago. And I think whilst in Cumbria we know community-led resilience works, it can still often be quite hidden. And we thought it would be useful to try and put a financial value on it in order to make it a bit more visible. And we had the chance to do that through CIPHER, which is Cumbria's project within the DEFRA and Environment Agency's Flood and Coastal Innovation Programme. That work went out to tender, and we ended up commissioning Duncan Shaw from Manchester Business School to lead the work. So I guess if we move on, I think that there's a hope that obviously trying to put a financial value on the work will secure more funding for similar work. And two parts to that, I think. That includes more funding for resilience work overall, and a bigger focus on investing in societal resilience as part of that. So if we move on to the next slide, Duncan, we can have a look at what approach was taken. And I guess that the headline here was this was very much a research-based approach to putting a value on the work. It started with some initial scoping work, looking at the literature to check that the work hadn't already been done. Simple answer was it hadn't. Nobody had tried to put a financial value on this kind of stuff before. And then to decide what the most appropriate methodology was going to be. And we settled on using a social return on investment approach. And then I say we, what I really mean is Duncan and Judy spoke to lots of people, including community members, emergency planners, council staff, and people from the emergency services to fill in the details, get the numbers, and work the model up. I think we've already spotted several of the people who were interviewed as part of that work on the call. So I'm sure you'll be able to chip in when we get to the questions afterwards. So next slide. And what did we find? I imagine if you're on the webinar, you've already seen the headline. If disruptions happen 5 years apart, every pound invested saves £35.12. And I guess there are many types of disruption. I don't think we've seen many tsunamis in Cumbria, but I think we've probably seen every other thing that is there on an icon, give or take. We've certainly experienced widespread flooding. We've experienced widespread power loss from strong winds and snow, and that power loss has sometimes lasted for more than a week in some of our communities, and wildfires are an increasing risk. And then, of course, there was the pandemic. So assuming there'd be a significant disruption every 5 years felt reasonable for many of our communities. But other communities might be different. And on this slide, on the bottom half, you can see how it looks for other return periods. If there's a disruption every year, investing £1 saves £161.77. That's probably the emergency manager's nightmare. If you only experience a disruption once every 20 years, which is probably every emergency planner's dream, you still save £90.48. So I think that is my introduction, and I'll hand you back over to Duncan to give you some of the detail.
Thank you, Carolyn. So nice to see you all. I guess I should probably reintroduce myself. So whilst I do and have done a lot of work around societal resilience, I started off building large quantitative models for the nuclear sector, understanding how nuclear material moved around nuclear plants, and big financial models that would begin to estimate the financial implications of that. So when Carolyn came to me and talked about combining these two interests of quantitative modelling and monetarisation and societal resilience, it was a great opportunity to jump at combining those two different parts of my working life. So this project is very much informed, as Carolyn said, by the people who are there, the people who we've talked to, the people, and Carolyn's given a good summary of who they are. And what they told us were the types of things that they invested in and the sorts of savings that they made as a result of that investment. So the model that was built against 6 different types of investments. We looked at the investments that individuals made, the investments that communities, voluntary sector and businesses made. And we looked at that in terms of their own resilience. So what did individuals invest in to make themselves resilient? Same with communities and so on. And then we looked at the investments made by government and civil society in making other people resilient. So in making society more resilient. And from that, we collected a whole range of different investments. But we also had to understand the savings. So the savings that individuals, communities, voluntary sector and businesses made from being resilient, and the savings that government and civil society made from other people being resilient. So how did that investment transfer into them avoiding the effects of a disruption or lessening those effects to some extent? From all of those interviews and workshops and reports and all of those sorts of information that we got, we identified 24 investments and 50 savings. So some of the investments that individuals made were around resilience kit, around protecting their property. Communities invested in the community resilience group where those existed, in volunteer action, so creating equipment and building awareness of the need for that, around events, and you can see the other sorts of investments that were made. In terms of the investment that government made, we looked not at the whole apparatus of government, but we looked at the cost of an additional member of government staff devoted to supporting communities, individuals, voluntary sector and businesses to become more resilient. So almost think about it as an extra FTE, an extra person, an extra layer of investment to provide support to society to become more resilient. So 24 investments and 50 savings, and the savings are much broader based. So around individuals, there was savings around quality of life, them avoiding either the anticipation or the impact of a disruption, that on their property, on travel, thinking about how and put in less effort if they're more resilient and save money on perhaps bringing in professional services, reducing the consequences for some of the spaces, reducing the impact, not eliminating these entirely, but still understanding how can societal resilience perhaps just save a little on some of these costs. In terms of government, you can see it's quite a thick section there. And this was looking at the interventions before, during and after, looking at the healthcare implications and the savings that would be made on things like psychosocial strain, non-fatal injuries and so on, and avoiding as deep an impact to the economy from being able to lessen the impact through society being more resilient and people being able to travel to work, to go to work, because perhaps homes have been less disrupted, and the sorts of savings that can be made as a result of that. So for each of these investments and savings, we explored the cost of one unit, so the cost of one person, the cost of one journey, the cost of one community. We estimated the number of units, so how many people, and the frequency of that saving or that investment. So does it happen every year? Does it happen every incident? Does it happen every 10 years? And we built a hypothetical place, and we created all the costs that were not hypothetical, and all the people and the frequency around that hypothetical place. And that hypothetical place is seen in Cumbria. It's seen in every LRF district, every EPG, every RRP in the UK. So it's almost a place that you will recognise, but you will not be able to pinpoint because everybody recognises it. And what we also looked at for these investments and savings was the proportion of that was saved as a result of societal resilience, recognising that societal resilience might not be able to stop a bridge being taken out, but it might be able to help people with with some of the transport implications afterwards. So it wasn't that everything was 100%. Everything was costed 100%. Some of them were costed at 10% if societal resilience could only save a small amount, or 60% if it could save a little bit more. We had a hierarchy of data. So when we were populating the model with data, the first source of data we used was government guidance. So for example, there's data on psychosocial impacts and on physical injury, and we used those sources. Where government guidance wasn't available, we used evidence from authoritative sources, so NGO, INGO reports that would be based on research that told us what the equivalent costs or quantities might be in other places. Where those weren't available, we used the financial accounts. So some of the Cumbria flood groups very kindly sent us some financial assessments that they had made on investments over the last periods. Where that wasn't available, we used awards from grants and the sorts of estimates that community groups were putting in around the proposals that had been made or awarded. And where that wasn't available, we used some of the estimates from individuals, from news articles, or our own research, our own assessments by going on and finding out the cost of things. So again, the hierarchy of data started with government guidance and with the government figures. And what that allowed us to do was to build a model of all of those investments, of all of those savings, based on that data, that helped us to understand that of the £1 that was invested, most of it is invested by an individual. So most of it is invested by individuals investing in their own resilience. And when you start thinking about the sorts of ways in which people make themselves resilient, yes, it was around householders insurance, it was around property measures, but there was investment by other parts as well. And some of those other investments helped individuals to become more resilient in their places. So communities investing in volunteers helped individuals to understand the merits and the benefits of household insurance or property flood measures. Apologies for the slide. Don't know what's happened there. The £35.12 was spent. The majority of that was saved by government. Over £18 of that was saved by government because of the significant costs that government would have if a disruption were to happen. Let me move on to the next slide because that's a bit more readable for you. So government's investment is relatively minor, as we saw from the one of the earlier slides. 3p in the pound was government's investment. Again, that was not the whole investment of government. That was the investment of one additional person to put additional staff time that would help to coordinate and facilitate society's actions, to identify grants and to negotiate for those grants, and to invest that time in supporting individuals, communities, voluntary organisations and businesses to become more resilient. But from them becoming more resilient, they were able to save, as I say, £18 because of the savings around psychosocial and so forth. And when we've been talking to government about that figure, is what we're saying is that the investment of staff time is so crucial, and that helps all levels to put more effort, more focus, and more activity around societal activities. That's not to say that the role of government is significant beyond. It's more that we amplify this because we realise that government are one of the major purse holders for investing in societal resilience. Carolyn will talk about in a moment how that really can affect community groups, but we don't want to shine a light only on government. We'll shine a light on the voluntary sector, and Carolyn will do that in a moment. What we also looked at was how different parts of society invest and how they benefit from that investment directly. So if individuals invest the 71p in the pound, then what's the corresponding saving that individuals might make? And the same for every one of these different entities. So individuals, we found that if they invest the £71 on average, 71p on average, then they would save £10.94 if an emergency or if a disruption happens every 5 years, a multiplier of 15. And if you look down these multipliers, then you'll see that because of the small investment that government make, the overwhelming comparison, the overwhelming benefit that they make a very significant multiplier, hopefully helping government to argue for more investment in this space. I don't want to put too much emphasis on those multipliers though, because yes, it's about arguing for investment. It's about creating and adding this into the argument for investment. But that investment needs to be made at all levels. So it's individuals recognising, as they do, that they have a role to play and that their investment is key. Communities recognising, as they do, that they have a role to play and bringing individuals together to support that. And we heard amazing contributions from the interviewees as to how that already happens, but how that can be facilitated by more investment in communities, and the same with the voluntary sector and with businesses. As I said earlier, societal resilience is much more than £1 spent is £35 saved. It is about people's lives. It is about communities. And I'm going to hand over to Caroline to talk about what that means.
Thanks, Duncan. So, yeah, as Duncan has said, we've just spoken a lot about the money and the financial value of investing in resilience. But at the end of the day, let's not forget that resilience is about people. And so let's move on and take a look at what investing in societal resilience looks like at a community level. So I'm not going to read out the speech bubbles on the comic strips that follow, but I'm just going to pull out a few points for each. And I guess the first point is that it often only needs small amounts of money at community level. Grants of a few hundred or a few £1,000s are often enough to bring communities together to talk about the risks they face and how they might start to prepare for them. And that might be money for room hire and refreshments, and then maybe some basic training and equipment, which is often things like maps, torches, and maybe tabards, not always tabards. And those community conversations often lead to simple things that make a big difference. It might mean more people signed up for flood alerts and flood warnings, and maybe understanding the difference between them. And hopefully it also means that people remember to check that their neighbours have received those warnings too. For some communities, that might mean they develop a written community emergency plan. But for others, particularly smaller communities, they might decide it's easier just to set up a Facebook page or to use an existing community WhatsApp group as the way they'll respond to emergencies. And I mean, I saw this in action. A few weeks ago, we had a water outage. Everybody on the village WhatsApp group knew who had water and who didn't have water, at least an hour before any messages came from the water company, and a good 12 hours before any bottled water was delivered. And I think that mirrors what we see across a wide range of incidents. Communities can often respond before anyone else, or they do still like to know that someone else is coming in to back them up and they're not going for it alone. And then if you move us on, Duncan, I think it's worth explaining that communities can also add huge capacity into warning and informing. In my local community, they're the boots on the ground, out knocking on doors before it floods. But don't worry, they're also very clear. They're running away well before the floodwater arrives. So back in December, it was looking likely that Cockermouth, where I live, might flood again. And it was very much a team effort to ensure the community knew and was prepared. And what that looked like in practice was the Environment Agency emailed across a map of the properties they were most worried about. Those maps got printed off at the Mountain Rescue Team base in town. And then it was the Community Emergency Response Group volunteers who went out to knock on doors and make sure people were aware of the risk. And being prepared can limit the impact. Knowing that a flood warning's gone out means that people can fit floodgates and other property level protection. They move important things upstairs. They think about moving their car out of the flood risk area. They can walk out of their house or can be helped to leave their house in daylight and can go and stay with friends instead of having to go to a reception centre. And all of that preparation work means you're far less likely to end up trying to evacuate homes, or more complicated, evacuate a care home in the middle of the night by boat or helicopter. And so you're avoiding lots of stress, confusion and danger, which is all much better for people, but has a big financial saving too. So I think if we move on to the next slide, there are 6 main audiences for these findings, and different messages for each. Next slide, if you move us on, Duncan, shows us what some of those are. Again, rather than talk you through every last detail, if for this one, we just look at government, And government in here includes local authorities and government agencies like the Environment Agency. Investing £50,000 in staff time, so roughly one staff member in your own organisation or in a local partner organisation, saves you £917,000 and saves society £1.75 million if a disruption hits within 5 years. That sounds like a pretty good investment to me, but I'll leave you to think out whether you think it's a pretty good investment and hand you back to Duncan for the last few slides.
Thanks, Carolyn. So what now? Well, people debate the number, they'll debate the methodology. It's all available for debate. And I think Andrew might put in the chat the where you can download the full report if you wanted to. People might want to tailor this number. They might want to take it from 5 years and stretch it to 10, or take it down to 2 or 3 years. They might want to look at it in terms of individuals or investment by businesses. They might want to amplify it, share it around. They might want to use it in terms of trying to secure funding for their own interests. As Caroline said at the very beginning, our interest was to create a bigger cake for resilience. So it was with the interest of understanding how can we start to compete with these other sectors that are able to evidence that investing £1 in whatever their agenda is returns a financial payback. With resilience, I think we've of course, as Caroline's said, we've got the social imperative and the social argument for why resilience is important, the moral imperative, the ethical reasons for why we need to invest and continue to put this at the top of the priority list. And hopefully this, for some, gives a bit of a financial argument towards why we should be investing in resilience. So as Carolyn said at the very beginning, this was DEFRA Environment Agency supported. So we do have an interest in flooding, but we do believe that this crosses a whole range of different disruptions, as Caroline said at the very beginning. So the report's available to download for those of you who'd like to have a look at it. And thank you very much. I'll hand back to Andrew, and thanks for your attention.
Hi, thank you, Duncan and Carolyn. Thank you very much for taking us through the report, and now it's really the opportunity for the interactive aspect of the webinar. So I'll ask people who will to ask questions by raising hands or perhaps putting questions or comments into the chat. Just while I'm waiting on a few more hands to be raised, I see Duncan, perhaps you might want to reflect on one of the comments by Andy Esson in relation to the House of Lords National Resilience Inquiry report, and obviously that's kicking off, I think, today. But in terms of the possibility for research such as this to be used within the inquiry, so maybe that's something that you might want to pick on first as people raise their hands with questions. So I see Martin, your hand is raised. So once Duncan has addressed the House of Lords, then Martin, I will enable your camera and microphone.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Andy, for the question. I was watching the footage of the inquiry happening today, and I was wondering how many people would have that in one ear and us in another ear. So thanks everybody for going the House of Lords. It's much appreciated. The inquiry has asked for has launched a call for evidence, and so it might be that we contribute this in. It will be for the inquiry to decide what it can pick up, because I think it will get a lot of information. I think resilience is clearly a very hot topic at the moment, and certainly we see more and more people talking about resilience in a very different way. So whether it's other parts of government, whether it's other parts of society and businesses, I would imagine that inquiry or that committee will get an avalanche of information that is being contributed from a lot of very different types of interpretation of what resilience is, and it will be for them to decide whether they're looking at societal resilience and infrastructure and business and all aspects of resilience. But it would be nice to think that we could contribute this in as just one part of the jigsaw that they're trying to build for themselves.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And of course, others, when they're submitting their own evidence from their own organisations, obviously would be very welcome to pick up on the kind of material and evidence base produced by the NCSR. So, Martin, please, if you could, I can see in your background where you're from, but if you could perhaps just introduce yourself and your organisation, please.
Yeah, I have to say it's a bit wilder and wetter than it does in that picture up here at the minute. It's pretty bad. Anyway, no, thank you. I've been an emergency planning officer for some 25 years or so. I can see some of my colleagues and ex-colleagues down in West Sussex, where I started, are on the call as well, which is fab. But I've been up in Scotland for the last 20 odd years, and in Dumfries and Galloway for the last 17, 18 years. I just wanted to reflect, it's not really a question, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that we took this big leap of faith in investing quite a lot of money in community resilience after two particularly harsh winters, 9, 10, 10, 11, where it wasn't actually flooding, but it was persistent, prolonged, deep cold. We had a kind of permafrost. I don't know if anyone can remember these winters, but they were particularly harsh. And we wanted to encourage individuals to be what we call the good citizen, good neighbour. And we did that, and we kind of re-rolled a traditional emergency planning officer and actually called them a community resilience officer. So we've been investing that, 50,000 equivalent kind of slide that you said. Since then, we're established for about 105, I think it is, community councils across the area. It's quite a large area, D&G. And we've got active community resilience groups in about 60 of these. And I've shared in the web page and in the sidebar, sorry, our Padlet, our community resilience page, which is public facing. Unfortunately, our community resilience officer, I don't think is on the call today. She's actually out at Glentrule having a meeting with a prospective group. So I just wanted to reflect on that. So thank you. This kind of just gives me the reassurance that I kind of knew instinctively, but it's great to see the facts and figures behind it. So I can go back to elected members who just agreed a policy for community resilience last month at committee. We've now, investing heavily. We do a lot of work with groups, and this just reinforces the reason why we do it. And now I can actually put some academic rigor behind that leap of faith that we made. So thank you. I had seen the House of Lords, the 14 questions that are published. I think you're right, there will be a lot of interest in it. And my final comment is just that for those of you that haven't seen it, the Strategic Defence Review 2025 was published at the end of last year. When it was published, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Chief of the Defence Staff, and the Chief of MI6, within the period of 10 days, all gave public speeches about the importance of the Strategic Defence Review and the changing world that we're in. And probably who could have guessed last November when they gave these speeches just how much it would have changed in the last 3 or 4 months. It changes by the week. But I refer people to that if they haven't seen it, particularly Chapter 6. So you just Google SDR 25 or Strategic Defence Review 2025, go to Chapter 6, page 40 odd, I think it is, and it's called the Whole of Society Approach. And it just links in to what we've been talking about defence and a really holistic review of defence, not just about the lethality of our weapons, but about actually how we prepare our homeland better as well. So a defence component to all of that. So just thank you to all involved in the research. Thanks for sharing it. Thanks for sharing the papers, and thanks for organising today's briefing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. Before I move on to Judith as well, but just Carolyn, Duncan, whether there's anything that you'd like to pick up on. Of course, Carolyn, a neighbouring council area to yourselves in terms of where Martin is.
Yeah, I can promise you it is just as wild here. I'm sat in Fire HQ in Penrith at the moment, and yeah, I'm not sure I want to venture back across the A66. I mean, I think it sounds like you, unsurprisingly, Dumfries and Galloway has been on a pretty similar journey to Cumbria, Martin, of knowing we need to do it, and just going, you know what, it's great to be able to start to better articulate some of what achieves from that. I mean, I think in the 5 years I spent as community resilience coordinator, which went over that pandemic time, I suddenly discovered that it was very easy to put anything that didn't fit neatly into another box into the community resilience box. And I'll hand over in a minute, because I'm pretty sure Judith will come in and talk about some similar issues. But that was things like cost of living crisis, and then community cohesion. I think increasingly some of those wider risks that you're mentioning around defence, around the disinformation that seems to be an increasing challenge. So yeah, great to hear the feedback, and we should probably meet up somewhere on the border at some stage, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic idea. We do have a cross-border forum. We do meet Jonathan and his team, Northumberland, the borders, including Northern Ireland, and the Isle of Man. So we need to get you involved, I think, and maybe have a spin-off community resilience chat for anyone who's got a particular niche interest. And
I suspect my Liam, who is my replacement as community resilience coordinator, has already gone feral and made some links to Dumfries and Galloway, I think.
Well, thank you very much. So I have a number of additional hands raised. So I think Judith, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm the Westland Furness councillor for Greystoke, Ullswater and Dacre. So yeah, I remember the 2010 freeze as well. It was a classic one. We had people stuck in their houses and couldn't get out for nearly a month or more because it was elderly people. It was just so icy. I also remember there was a large heap of gravel appeared in the village hall car park towards the end of the freeze, and everybody was being polite because everybody thought it belonged to somebody else, and the message didn't get round, because it was before social media, to say go and help yourselves and spread it on your neighbour's drive as well and whatever. But yeah, I was going to more talk about the fact that I've got housing homelessness, community safety, community resilience, also poverty alleviation. I've got areas in my ward which are in the dark blue of the floodplains now, built back in the 80s. I have the issue that I'm trying to say to them, you need to look to protect your properties. And this sort of information is very useful to me to be able to use to discuss with them. I've got the problem, a lot of them just turn around and say, well, your council's going to stop all the flooding, aren't you? You're going to do this and you're going to do that, and it's going to stop it all. Nope, that's not going to be possible. In some ways, we need to persuade them to do their own defences, because we're not going to be able to stop the flooding. We can't stop the rain. I've got more concerns because I've got the poverty alleviation in my patch. I'm hearing to do with some communities where they're going to be very prone to flooding and other risks, but because of the cost of living crisis, they're not going to be able to afford to put barriers on their doors. They may be able to afford sandbags, which as we know, people are clinging to but are not very good. And it's how we can, there seems to be funding available to go to community resilience groups, which is great. But how are we going to be able to get funding to those households who are not able to do protection for themselves, who are possibly the most vulnerable households financially, may not have insurance? So it is that thing of how can we use this evidence to help support those households to get in the defences that they need to do, and to think about all the other things. You know, I bumped into a friend on my way back from Leeds on Tuesday from a Future of Council Housing conference, and she's well off, but they're busy stockpiling food at the moment because they're worried about the war and what's going to happen. We've got a lot of households who are not able to stockpile food, so if we have the electricity going off, so it's how we use this evidence to be able to support those households who are very vulnerable to all the risks that are coming our direction. Sorry, I'm sort of
well, thank you very much, Judith, and it's really great to have elected member representatives as well. And at our conference just a couple of weeks back, we had several elected members from different parts of the country, and it was really fantastic engagement between everyone. I wonder, Duncan, Carolyn, is there anything that you would like to reflect on in relation to Judith's comment?
So I'll jump in quickly, because I think when I first saw the breakdown of the data in terms of who invests and who saves, and I think one of Duncan's slides shows this, that a lot of the big figures in here are about people investing in their own resilience. And my first reaction was very much the same as yours, Judith, that that's great if you can afford to invest. But we both know we've seen flooding in parts of Cumbria where perhaps only half your households have property insurance, and certainly don't have the money to invest up front in property level protection. I mean, I guess my take is there's no quick fix to any of this. We both know that. But I think if we pull out those bits from the report, there is a strong message back to government there that actually there are some inequalities in this. And it again puts some figures on that ability that if an individual can afford to invest in their own resilience, there's a big saving. But what about those people who can't afford to invest that money in their own resilience? So yeah, we can have a hunt through the slides and pull out that bit of it, and I think then have a think about how we use that.
And just to add, so I completely agree with what Carolyn's just said. Just to add, in some cases, it might be that people do have the means, but they might not have the knowledge. And so investing in the community group might help for that information to be distributed across the community to understand what is the risk, what is an appropriate response to that risk. So I see a comment in the chat that's talking about the cost of insurance and talking about, I think it was implying the importance of flood re. So these sorts of really important messages going out to communities, yes, can be done in a top-down way, or it can be a simmering way throughout by people who know because they've been enabled by other people to get the knowledge and to be able to cascade that knowledge out.
Well, thank you very much. Before I bring in Carol Rayburn, and Carol, just to let you know that you're enabled in terms of your microphone and camera. Just picking up on a point in the chat that Anna Beasley. So just to let you know, the recording of this webinar will be available soon or in due course. And of course, there is a lot of data and various other things provided within the report itself. So if you haven't downloaded the report, it's available via a link that I've added to the chat a bit further up. So Carol, if I can bring you in. So Carol, it's great to see you again. Obviously, it's been perhaps almost a year, coming up to a year since your involvement in one of our webinars. So it's great. But if you please introduce yourself and ask your question or comment.
Nice to see you again too, Andrew. So Carol Rayburn, Director of the Scottish Flood Forum. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate Duncan and Caroline on a stellar piece of work here. It strikes a lot of chords with the work that we do with community groups across Scotland. Scotland has its first national flood strategy, which came out about a year ago, and there is a lot of emphasis, shall we say, on the role that communities have to play. So I think this is come at a really fortuitous time for us this side of the border. But I was just wondering if the slide deck that you had there, it just struck me that it would be a really useful briefing pack for MSPs as we are about to go into elections. And this is me being a canny Scot here, Duncan, so I'm sure you can appreciate that. Because I think unless the MSPs are, or any MPs in fact, have experience or have a constituency that has experienced flooding, wildfires, all the other climate aspects as well, that they're not necessarily going to appreciate the value of community groups, the individuals, the work that Martin, who I've known for a long time now, is doing in Dumfries and Galloway. I see that Rob Murray from the British Red Cross is also on the call. So, you know, the volunteer hours is maybe the thing that is used a lot of the time, but actually seeing how that investment could be productive. I know that Aviva, the insurance company, have actually done some work and have been approaching MSPs, alerting them to the level of flood risk from coastal, river and surface water flooding. And we've also seen and had practical experience of individual groups who've been cut off that haven't been able to get support from local authorities and many other reasons, and have really kept their communities operating when local authority resources are stretched elsewhere. So I think now would be quite a fortuitous time to actually cascade this on a wider basis, just to make people understand, particularly when organisations that do rely on government funding, both sides of the border, are under pressure. So thank you for that, and thank you for giving us another piece of armour to wave in front of these folk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. So again, Carolyn, Duncan, if there's anything you'd like to come in on.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks for your contributions into this work when we were doing it. So I guess, yeah, we will do our part in terms of these sorts of webinars, producing reports, producing materials where we're asked, and going and talking to groups where we're invited to. And it would be great if other people want to amplify that in different ways as well, so that, you know, if it becomes known that investing in resilience is not just the right moral, social, but also the right financial thing to do, then the more voices that we've got going into that, I think the stronger it helps everybody, whether you're an individual, whether you're a community group applying for money, whether you're an organisation at the centre of this that are trying to help ministers understand the value, whether you're local government trying to get a bigger piece of the puzzle, whether you're national government arguing to a Treasury Minister for more investment in resilience. We're all pulling in the same direction, and we have really strong anecdotes, and hopefully this just provides another piece of that armour, as you rightly described, if people decide to pick up this figure and run with it.
Thank you, Duncan. So obviously we still welcome, we have the potential for an additional 10 minutes. So if anyone would like to raise their hands in terms of asking a question, please do so. I see there are obviously different contributions then within the chat. Sasha, just picking up on building that narrative that points to the merits of making this a priority against the landscape of reduced resources. I also see a comment a bit further up from Jasmine in relation to, I guess, public messaging and different messaging and how those could be, I guess, cascaded through the public, and how to do that in a good way. So Duncan, of course, some of the last slides were kind of focusing on that kind of public messaging and communications angle, and how evidence like this can be used by different folks to different audiences. So I don't know if there's anything based on the comments that you see in the chat, if there's anything additional you might want to say on those.
What the team decided was that we were going to keep it really simple. So we would come out with one number, and so that we didn't try to be too sophisticated to say, well, if you're this, then it's that. If you're something else, then it's a different number, which is why we're using the term, £1 invested is £35 saved. And I think we'll probably stick with that, so that we don't have too many numbers, too many different variations, too many different cuts of the data. And I think that's the way of making sure that we speak with one voice, but also giving the resilience community the opportunity to do the same for those that decide to do it, rather than us coming out with lots of different cuts of the same data. And so I'm just reflecting on some of the comments, thinking, yes, we can interrogate the data for other aspects and share that. But we probably share it one-to-one rather than sharing it out with the community, to keep the purity of that £1 invested is £35 saved. Thanks.
And I wonder, Carolyn, then from your context in terms of, how have you perhaps been using the figure on the report since it's been produced then in your context in Cumbria? Have there been kind of engaging conversations with different groups on the ground?
So I think we're probably just starting those conversations in Cumbria, Andrew. So we're in the position we are just moving towards mayoral combined authority and have work going on around one of the resilience trailblazers. So kind of just starting to have those conversations, but certainly meetings in the diary with some of the key strategic partnership groups in Cumbria to go out and talk about it and spread the message. If I just go back, I think it was Jasmine's comment in the chat about what could be done to improve community relation and communication. I think that's worth thinking about a bit in terms of, we know that the public or sections of the public listen to different people. So I think for me, it's about thinking through, if you're government trying to make an investment in community resilience, where do you spend that £50,000? It might be in your emergency planning team, and for some areas will be absolutely the answer. But for other areas, you might want to be investing that money in a local partner organisation who can go out and have those conversations on your behalf. So, I think we've been looking at it recently in funding and in some of those conversations about where do we head next. And I think one thing I often hear is it's really useful to have someone from outside the council, or really useful to have someone from outside the Environment Agency who can go out and have those initial conversations with communities, because sometimes there's an awful lot of baggage depending on which lanyard you've got round your neck.
Thank you. Just on that point, I see Judith, you've raised hand. Please go ahead.
As a ward councillor, I'm bringing it up at parish council meetings on a regular basis, that they need to be looking at emergency planning. Some, places like Patterdale Parish Council, Storm Desmond, they were brilliant, and they were extremely good. Other parish councils are beginning to think about it, and community groups separately are beginning to think about it. But it's very useful for me because I've got people who are working on it in Westland and Furness who I understand are going out to Patterdale WI sometime later this year and are possibly going to go to the Ullswater breakfast. We've also got CVS, Carolyn's team, and also got Action with Communities in Cumbria who are also on here. So in a way, yes, we can have different voices speaking, which is great. But I think it is, initially, I find parish councils and people like myself going out and talking about it generally to get the conversation started, to then pass them on to other people to talk. It's very useful. It's good having different voices.
Well, thank you. And before I bring in Martin, I did notice also this morning on LinkedIn, colleagues from University College London talking about and using the headline figure in some of the posts and comments that they were making. So we also see the kind of the circulation of messages within the academic sphere in relation to disaster research. But Martin, please go ahead.
Yeah, I've got to be very brief because I've got another meeting at 1, but just reflecting on the key communicator aspect, we recognise that people hate the council. I mean, everyone just hates the council for everything. It's part of what we do, with bins and potholes and all the rest. It's a hard gig trying to be an advocate for something. So, for instance, we have a community-facing public information platform, and we took off the council logo and just called it DG VOST, the Virtual Operations Support Team. And one of the first comments we got on the social media aspect of it was, God, this web page is so much better now. The council's got nothing to do with it, even though it was just the council staff that were still doing the back office. It's just perceptions, and we're not, we have a good laugh about that, but we're not precious about the badge. So we will probably put community resilience under a Safer Communities partnership, which is part of community planning, and it will be the local senior officer from the fire service who will front that, because everybody loves a fire officer, heroes one and all, totally different public perception than the council. So we will probably put it under the fire service, and we're not precious about that because what we're interested in is the best outcome and the best uptake. It doesn't matter who's the key communicator, as long as they're well respected by the intended target audience. So that's the view that we've taken up here. It's about making sure it lands well, not who's fronting or whose badge is in the corner. That's all. Right, and apologies, I do need to go, but thank you all for your work.
That's a fantastic point there, Martin. So thank you very much, and thank you for attending. So I guess it's just really whether Duncan or Carolyn have any kind of last comments, but we're coming up towards our allotted time. So please go ahead, and then we will close.
Carolyn?
I see you came off mute, Duncan, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks everybody for engaging with this. It's really nice to present to an audience that are really enthusiastic about it. So thank you very much. Feel free to use the number, feel free to cite the report, and yeah, I hope it's useful. Carolyn?
Yeah, no, same message. Thank you for turning up and listening to us talk you through it, and I hope it proves useful to everyone. Certainly think it's going to prove useful to us. And
just a final thanks. Yeah, thank you very much to Duncan and Carolyn for obviously the tremendous amount of work that went into producing the report with the others within the team, but also then obviously for then today's presentation. So as I said in the chat, you know, the copy of the recording will be available. The report is freely available and downloadable from the web page. So please also share with your networks and make sure that the kind of message is amplified. So thank you all for attending today's webinar, and hopefully we'll see you at the upcoming webinars where we'll be focused on a range of other different subjects, but all relating to societal resilience. So thank you very much.